Week 8, Lesson 6, Frank Miller's Daredevil. Daredevil was created by Stan Lee and Bill Everett in 1964 as a second-rate Spider-Man. He was a blind lawyer named Matt Murdock who dressed up as a devil and fought crime in his spare time. Stan Lee feared that blind kids wouldn't like the character, but it turned out that they loved the fact that there was a hero who had the same handicap they did. Despite some imaginative stories, Daredevil never really got a huge readership under Stan Lee's writing. After 20 issues, the stories started to focus more on the criminal elements. And artist Gene Golan, who was better known for drawing Tomb of Dracula, drew many of the issues, and they were very solid issues, but lack of any good villains stopped the series from progressing in popularity. This changed when a young New York artist named Frank Miller came on to write and draw Daredevil. Frank Miller was an American born in 1957. He came from an Irish Catholic family. He grew up reading Marvel Comics and practiced drawing and inking. Before writing Daredevil, Miller's biggest break was drawing for other smaller Marvel titles. In 1979, Miller drew 2 issues for Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, where Daredevil appeared. Frank Miller liked the character so much that he asked Marvel's top editor at the time, Jim Shooter, to be transferred to that book. At the time, Daredevil sales were doing so poorly that the book was about to be cancelled, and that character was about to share a book with Captain America. Frank Miller started drawing Daredevil with issue number 158. Miller had a less detailed style than Gene Golan's. His art was mainly inspired by Eastern art from Japanese manga, mainly a series called Lone Wolf and Cub. While not terrible, the issues were nothing special, heavily dealing with continuity, but not having any big changes that are worth mentioning here. Things changed, though, with Daredevil, issue number 168, when Frank Miller was allowed to start writing the book as well as draw it. In his first issue as writer, he introduced Elektra, a woman who was working on the other side of the law. In her debut, Miller was able to give her a complete history with Matt Murdock, revealing that she'd gone to college with him and been his first true love. But now, she was working as an assassin, and he was a vigilante who promised to stop her. If you get the chance to read this issue, I highly recommend it. It's a well-crafted issue that throws a lot of information to the reader, but is never boring or too slowly paced. He introduced a character and made it seem like she'd always been part of Daredevil's mythology. Frank Miller's first attempt to write a comic created a better story than many of the best writers did at the time. As the run went on, Elektra began to explore her complex relationship with Daredevil. Their fights were a form of foreplay, and sex was had between the panels. There is one page where she wakes up in Matt Murdock's apartment in her underwear. They're clearly lovers, although they probably aren't right for each other. Daredevil is a lawyer and a vigilante. Elektra is an assassin. Shortly after Elektra's appearance, she became one of the most popular women in comics. When Stan Lee started Daredevil, he was a swashbuckling character. When Frank Miller wrote Daredevil, he reworked the character into a ninja. He revealed that the character had a past that fans were not previously aware of. He introduced Daredevil's mentor, Stick, who was revealed to have trained Daredevil on how to fight when he was a boy. And Miller brought more mystical aspects into the story, like ninjas that disappeared when they were killed. There were elements of manga that started to seep into the book which most American readers had never experienced before, making the book feel unlike anything else being sold at the time. Daredevil had one worthy enemy before Frank Miller started writing the book, and that was Bullseye. Miller made Bullseye into a more complex character, giving him a brain tumor. At one point, Daredevil had to decide if he should save Bullseye's life and allow him to get his brain surgery, which could still save his life, or not take the chance and just let Bullseye die. Daredevil lets him live, and forever regrets doing so. After the surgery, Bullseye is not cured and becomes even more deranged, throwing everything he can at Daredevil and killing dozens of other people. The Daredevil comic was also known for taking other characters from Marvel heroes and letting them fight against Daredevil, so that the writers of Daredevil wouldn't have to come up with their own original villains. The most famous example of this happening is with Spider-Man's villain, Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin of crime. In Spider-Man, the Kingpin was a bit of a joke. He would hit Spider-Man with his stomach and hold him off that way. Daredevil was dealing with more realistic criminal issues than Spider-Man was, and needed a Kingpin to forward these stories. They took Spider-Man's Kingpin and made him go from being ineffectual to being a terrifying crime lord who only made calculated moves to further his power and eliminate his competition. This is where things started to come together in Miller's run. It dealt with serious real-world crimes like drug use, rape, wrongful conviction, corruption, child abuse, and criminal aspects that were something other than superpowered villains. While Daredevil technically has a power with his radar sense, which allows him to see to a limited degree, he is otherwise an unpowered human being who gets beat up and can take months to recover. It's more dangerous for him to fight crime than it is for Spider-Man or Superman. Kingpin made it clear how dangerous fighting crime was going to be for Daredevil, and Daredevil returned the favor by showing just how much one man in a mask could destroy his operations. It became a battle of wits and wills. Matt Murdock was going after the Kingpin as both Daredevil and Matt Murdock. The Kingpin finally got sick of Matt Murdock and his partner, Foggy Nelson, and hired an assassin to take them out. That assassin was Elektra, who had a chance to kill Matt Murdock's law partner, Foggy, but refused because doing so would destroy her lover, Matt. It was at this point when she was attacked by Bullseye, the killer that Matt Murdock saved. He brutally attacks her and uses her own weapons to kill her. She gets impaled. Miller has gone on record saying that this fight was symbolic for her being raped. The brutality of his attacks left Elektra dead. So, not only did Frank Miller create one of the most popular female characters in comics, he shocked readers everywhere by killing her off. This led to Matt Murdock finding Elektra in the last stages of her life and vowing revenge on Bullseye. He fights Bullseye and leaves him paralyzed, a prisoner in his own body. Bullseye stayed in that condition for almost 2 decades. The last issue Frank Miller wrote in his initial run of Daredevil was about Daredevil going to Bullseye's hospital room and playing a game of Russian roulette with him. After Elektra's death, Daredevil becomes more than a bit unstable. After Elektra's death, Miller mainly focused on the mystical side of Daredevil's life, as he got involved in a war between 2 ninja clans, bringing more elements from the Japanese comic, or manga, into the Daredevil series. Miller's run on Daredevil also made a few little changes. Daredevil was not a one-woman type of hero. He clearly slept around. And Daredevil was much more careless with his secret identity than other heroes like Spider-Man or Superman were. He left enough clues for reporter Ben Urich to figure out his secret identity. Ben did something that Lois Lane before him could never do. He discovered the superhero's secret identity. However, he decides to keep this a secret because he believed Matt Murdock was doing a lot of good as Daredevil. Frank Miller left the book in February 1983 after Daredevil issue number 191. However, he returned again in January 1986 with 8 more issues. 7 of those issues were about what happens when a superhero's archenemy finds out his secret identity. Matt Murdock's secretary and ex-girlfriend, Karen Page, was revealed to have become a drug addict and sold Matt Murdock's identity for her fix. This information makes it back to the Kingpin, who orders everyone who touched the note to be killed. Daredevil, issue number 227, has Matt Murdock's life forever changed. He has all his money stolen, he has people testify against him in court saying he got them to lie, causing him to lose his ability to practice law, and when he goes home to his apartment, it's blown up. At this point, Matt Murdock starts to go insane, becoming paranoid that everyone, including his law partner Foggy, to his past lovers, are working for the Kingpin. He attacks innocent civilians, he talks to himself, and in his broken state, he confronts the Kingpin, who easily defeats him in a 1-page fight. Matt finds himself woken up in a taxicab at the bottom of the ocean. Through pure will, he escapes and starts to rebuild himself one step at a time. The Kingpin, realizing Matt Murdock is not dead, becomes more desperate to stop the man. Eventually, the Kingpin throws everything he has at Matt Murdock, including some military elements, which use soldiers and helicopters to shoot up an area of New York known as Hell's Kitchen. Matt Murdock investigates a government cover-up and takes one of the soldiers to the newspaper building that Peter Parker's boss, J. Jonah Jameson, worked at, and exposes a large part of Kingpin Wilson Fisk's empire. There were a lot of big moments in this story, and it's arguably the best work of the careers of everyone involved. It's been reprinted many times with the title Daredevil, Born Again. Not only did it have a perfect pacing, amazing action scenes, great gritty artwork, an atmosphere that showed how helpless characters were compared to someone as evil as the Kingpin, but also had a main hero who was clearly unstable and oftentimes unlikable, and it got rid of Daredevil's costume for most of the issues. It was during this story that Daredevil confronted his religious background. As Frank Miller continued writing Daredevil, he realized that, and I quote, "I figured Daredevil must be Catholic, because only a Catholic could be both an attorney and a vigilante." End quote. Daredevil was confirmed as Catholic before this, but this was the first time a costumed hero's religious belief was brought up to the forefront of his story. Another first in comics since the Golden Age. So, why is this important? Well, last video we took a look at the resurrection of horror in science fiction. Miller's Daredevil was a new take on crime comics. It was about a nearly unpowered vigilante who dealt with real-world crimes and their terrifying consequences. This take on crime was so successful, it's how most crime is dealt with in comics to this day. It was also the first time in comics where a hero's sex life was addressed. On top of that, it was the first deconstruction of an existing superhero. It showed that if someone dressed up in a costume and fought crime, they probably wouldn't be stable. It introduced one of the most popular female characters in comics, only to have her killed off. It was the first time that some Eastern art styles and techniques started to get brought into American comics. It was one of the first times that the main character slowly became more irrational as the book went on, eventually ending up dangerously insane. It was one of the first times that a hero fought crime in just his street clothes for a few issues, and it was the first time that a major villain found out the hero's identity and wasn't killed or affected by amnesia immediately after. It represented a much darker take on the superhero, and along with the Punisher, the Phoenix, aka Jean Grey, and Wolverine, Daredevil helped usher in a darker, more violent take on the superhero genre and comic storytelling in general, setting up the elements that were needed to start the next era of comics, its Dark Age. Questions to contemplate. With the death of Gwen Stacy, Jean Grey, and Elektra, it seems that killing off the main love interest in superhero comics was a way to garner commercial and critical success. But why was it that almost none of the recurring male characters were ever killed off? What are the potential consequences and benefits for only killing off the female characters? Along with Claremont's X-Men, Frank Miller's Daredevil had a much higher female readership than most superhero titles. Why do you think this happened?